Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Project Lifecycle workshop, How to Manage Project Risks to Release Successful Products. I'm Gabriel Camacho, Digital Marketing Manager here at Planningsware, and we're really thrilled to have you join us this evening here in Paris. Let us know in the comments really quickly where you're joining us from. Today, we do have the honor to have Johanna Rothman, known as the Pragmatic Manager, with us. She's really here to offer a fresh perspective on project management, helping leaders and teams discover simple yet effective options. In addition, Johanna is also the author of 19 nonfiction books. So as an added bonus, participants today have the opportunity to win a free copy of her latest book, Project Lifecycles, which we'll send the link later on during the workshop. And all live participants will have the possibility to receive the first chapter after the workshop as well. In this workshop, we're going to quickly explore various project life cycles, understand the context where they are coming from or where they're most applicable, and explore deeper into both project and product risks. We'll also discuss how to tailor project life cycles to complement your team's culture. So without further ado, let's welcome Johanna. Johanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. All right, let's see if I can, here I am. Okay, so let's talk about why I wrote this book and why I'm here. If you ask anybody in various kinds of product development, not just software product development, but hardware also, everyone says, "Oh, we're using Agile," and they all say Agile in capital letters and quotes, and they're determined to talk about their Agile approach. But I see way too many problems. I see long and extensive backlogs and roadmaps. If you have a roadmap that's 18 months long, where's the experimentation? Where are the possibilities that you would go from here to there and maybe to somewhere else, all during your product development? And don't get me started about the backlogs that have very well-defined stories for months at a time. That's how teams become feature factories. And this whole idea of experimentation kind of goes out the window. Worse, there's a lot of late changes because I'm going to say this later, but no product survives first contact with the customer. So the longer it takes for you to release something to the customer, the longer that feedback cycle where you're kind of going off in product development la la land, and it's really hard to know, are you doing anything that will serve that customer? And worse for the teams, I see an absence of joy, an absence of ease, and lots of a grind of the daily work. And if this describes you, you are stuck in fake agility, which is a real problem in actually getting the work done. So the question is not, are you using a waterfall approach or an agile approach? The real question is, what do you need to know and when do you need to know it to manage all of the risks? And some of those, what you need to know, occur in the beginning of the project, and a lot more of the what you need to know to manage the risks are during the project. So this part of the presentation is all about clarifying risks. Let me talk about that. So I have experienced many choices for risks. And back in my early project management days, I was supposed to have a risk register of all the risks I could possibly think of for the project. For this project. And that's when I realized there were project-based risks that I could formulate in a way that made sense to me. There are product-based risks, and there are also portfolio and organization-based risks. In general, if you want to reduce the risks, you need to reduce the duration of the feedback loops so you can decide faster and manage better. So I tried to use the arrow on my keyboard. Yeah, that's okay. So let me talk about the project risks that will affect your life cycle choice. I use this idea of the project pyramid in all of my project management books. Inside the pyramid are the things that the team can control. What are the features we want to release? When do we want to release it? That's the time to release. And how good does it need to be? Those are the load defects. The team has total control over all of this. Nobody else has control over that. And the team can control this best when they choose the right life cycle for them now, for this project and this product. On the outside of the pyramid, there's always the people and their capabilities. This is what management wants to control, which is true, the cost to release, and the work environment. The work environment includes the organizational culture. And what I see way too often is management says, we want hundreds of features and we want them all to be perfect. And we don't want to spend any money on this. And we want it next week, right? And that is, sorry, I should not laugh at my own jokes. That's an overconstrained project because one of these 6 aspects will drive your project. Or one, right? There might be a couple of constraints right behind that driver, and then you need to be able to float the other 3. So if you are focused on a date, you can have the time to release as a driver, but you cannot have anything else as a driver, right? You will need to train off all of these risks against each other. So here are the product risks I also think about for life cycle choice. Sometimes there are totally deterministic projects where you're doing a port from an old kind of hardware to a new kind of hardware, right? You are sure nothing is going to surprise you in this particular project. In fact, if it wasn't a little bit challenging, you can use a checklist for this project. Then there are the totally non-deterministic projects. Those are all finding a new market, experimenting with who this product is for and when, and will they ever buy it, all that stuff. That's a totally non-deterministic project where you have recursive discovery. And then there are all these in the middle of projects. They have some determinism, some need for discovery. It's all in the middle, in that messy middle. And this is why I say very few product ideas survive first customer contact. Because until you actually release something for these customers, you don't know if you really have a totally deterministic or a totally non-deterministic project. You just don't know. Then there are all the portfolio risks. I'm going to take a sip of my tea. One thing I've seen a lot is that the more often the organization needs to decide on the project portfolio, the more you have a more non-deterministic product, right? And that's because the market is in flux, or you're a startup, or things are just not stable enough for you to make long decisions, right? The longer your decision duration, the more risk you might have in your project portfolio. Maybe not, right? Maybe you can make a decision for an entire year. But I think one thing that COVID taught us is that almost no decision is good for an entire year, right? We learned that at the start of the pandemic, and a lot of my clients said, I now see why you recommend not going more than a quarter until you reassess the project portfolio, because you just don't know what kind of risks you're going to have. Nobody can see that far out. It's fall here in Boston, which means I have allergies. It's just the way it is. Okay, so if you want general guidance on how to choose a life cycle based on your risk, then if you have organizational or product risks with less stability, you can use an incremental, a combination, or an agile approach. I'm going to talk about these more later. If you want more stability, if you have more stability, maybe an iterative approach is fine. And if you have a bunch of project risks, the date really focuses on an incremental life cycle, so there's low defects. More features might be iterative. Notice I have not said a serial life cycle anywhere, right? Serial life cycles are only good for very, very short projects. I recommend if you even have a project longer than 4 weeks, don't use a serial life cycle, right? It's just too risky to do that. So these are my general guidelines, and you will all, Gabriel, everybody's going to get a copy of the slides, right?
Yes, once again, everyone will also get the copy of the slides, so no worries on that.
All right, good. All right. All right, so let me talk about agility. All right, I said it's not a life cycle. That was from the previous slide. Agility is a culture change. It's not about mindset. It's not about practices. And oh my goodness, it is not about relative estimation. Relative estimation has zero to do with agility, right? So if you're thinking, well, we do a stand-up, that's a practice. Maybe that's helpful. And we do relative estimation. I don't recommend that. Maybe it's helpful to you. But agility is a culture change so that a cross-functional, collaborative team takes a small amount of WIP, that's work in progress, finishes it in increments to get feedback. Then they reflect on their work and start more work. This is my general agile picture. It does not matter if you use iterations. It does not matter if you use Kanban. It's all some responsible person makes a ranked backlog that's cross-functional team with all of the capabilities and skills it takes to develop this product, creates increments of work, they demo and they retrospect, and they do it again and again. I am now suggesting that people use the word agility and not agile. Agile is an adjective. Agility is a culture change. And I realize I'm being a little bit like Don Quixote here. But if we start thinking about how do we incorporate agility into our work, we might be more successful with our product development and create a much better team approach. So that's what I'm hoping you will get from this. Now, let me say one thing about how agile teams work. Agile teams always work through the architecture. And you're saying, well, we have component teams. They work across the architecture. It's really hard to do agility with component teams. So think about a small layer through the architecture. And I realized that somebody asked, when does WIP become too large when you either have very wide slices or you have many items in progress, because wide slices often create many items in progress. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about WIP later. So, Gabriel, it's time for the poll.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and launch a poll just to see what you in the audience would like to respond to. So I'll go ahead and share the poll now. And go ahead and submit your vote on which one is the most applicable to you. We're curious to see. Okay, so far right now, we have about 45%. My team mostly collaborates on most items. Some people work alone. 31% has says my team collaborates on some things, especially when we have some urgent issues. We have 19% that say my team always collaborates on all items. No one ever works alone. And then the last remaining, my team, we all work independently with 4%. And some say that my team collaborates only on urgent issues, which is about 2%.
Thank you. That's really great. So the fact that most of you are doing more collaboration rather than less, that means you have a real shot for being, for incorporating a culture of agility into your work. If we were at a coffee shop or a bar with a beverage of our choice, I would ask you a lot more about collaboration on the backlog, but we can leave that for later. So that collaboration piece is so important for the various life cycles. So let me talk a little bit first about serial life cycles. That's where you might know them as waterfalls, CH8, phases, whatever it is. But the characteristics of a serial life cycle is you do a lot of planning up front. You do all the requirements as if you could possibly know all of them when you know the least about the product. You do all of the analysis, all of the design, then coding, then integration, then test, and then release. Now, it's called a waterfall because everything is supposed to flow into the next phase. But the characteristics are this upfront planning, and then it's supposed to be a simple matter of execution. You might have heard a simple matter of programming. The programming is never the issue, right? Programming is easy compared to understanding what the people want from the product. So here's the reality I see from way too many even agile teams. The teams get stuck in requirements hell, right? They start to iterate on the requirements. They do some analysis and some design. They go back to the requirements. They do some coding. They do some integration. And then finally, they get to test. If you have a long backlog, you are probably stuck in requirements hell. And then this notion of freezes are slush, right? You start off the requirements in architecture, and then you realize you have some more requirements, and you go to design, and then you realize you have more and more requirements. If this is what happens in your supposedly agile team, then you are trying to do a lot of the upfront work way too early before you actually know anything. And the reality of a serial life cycle is that there are all these unplanned feedback loops. So the unplanned feedback loops really can kill your project. And if you are realizing way too late in the project, there are ways to deal with this with an incremental approach, whether or not you are actually agile, right? It's not about being agile. It's about having agility. And late and unplanned feedback loops do not offer you any agility. So Barry Beam, I think in the 70s, came up with a spiral model. Evolutionary prototyping became an iterative life cycle back in, I think, in the 80s, if not earlier. And even SAFE, which came out of RUP, is an iterative life cycle. Anytime you see the word phase with, what does SAFE have? The elaboration phase and all these other kinds of phases. That's an iterative approach. So that's where you develop this initial concept. One of my clients does a lot of design and implementation of that initial prototype and asks for customer feedback. And then the more you refine the prototype, that's great as long as you're getting feedback. But notice there's no releasing in here. And if you have very late feedback that goes back to the requirements here, this means you have all this upfront work that is probably waste. What do you do with this project now? Well, do you finish it and just ship it? Or do you realize it's not what the customers need and you start over at page 1? This is the problem with a purely iterative approach. Then there are times when an iterative approach can work. And as long as you get feedback from a real customer, you are much more likely to finish the work and have a product you can release. But if you only get feedback from inside the organization, my experience is that an iterative approach is just not good enough. So then there are the incremental life cycles. This is design to schedule, where you have release candidates. Back in the 80s and the 90s, when I used an incremental life cycle, we actually chose the highest priority feature or feature set. And that was, we did the entire feature set at one time. We did not pick and choose which features were highest priority. We mostly did feature sets. So, and I use stage delivery much more often. Sometimes we chose the riskiest feature set. I would choose the highest value now. But design to schedule focuses on release candidates, and stage delivery focuses on releases. Now, what did George Box say? All models are wrong, but some models are useful. I am not saying if you choose design to schedule, you cannot release. I'm not saying that at all. But most of us chose one life cycle or the other back when we use those. So it's all about working by feature set and deciding how you will get feedback from it. Now, the interesting thing is late feedback in incremental life cycles is a risk for design to schedule because everything is a release candidate. However, there's rarely a kiss of death in stage delivery because you've been releasing all along. And that's one of the reasons an agile approach really makes a lot of sense. The more often you release, the faster you get the feedback. So if you are not able to use an agile approach, you can certainly combine approaches. So I have a whole chapter in the book about combination approaches. The date-driven approach, if date is driving your project, then you might have in this initial passive requirements, I always like to time box these passive requirements, then prototype. And I time box the prototyping because I have worked with teams who wanted to get the prototype perfect before they released it for anybody. Except we can't get it perfect until we release it, right? There's that tension about perfection and getting feedback. If you follow my work for any length of time, you know I have trouble with this perfectionism. I have trouble releasing the first iteration of my books, even though I use Leanpub, because I want to make sure I get it good enough for people to actually offer me feedback. So we all have this perfectionism problem, and the question is, how do we deal with it? So I really like to implement 3 features. Why? Because 3 features is often just enough to give us enough feedback as to whether or not we need to go back to the architecture. And then more implementation, and I really like releasing as we go. Then if you're feature driven, you can use what one of my clients did many years ago, back in the early mid 2000s. They used 6-week time boxes with evolutionary prototyping, and they demoed whatever they had every 6 weeks. And that's where they had a decision point. Do we do more prototyping? Do we do more releasing? And they often did releasing and prototyping in alternating 6-week time boxes, and then started to release and release and release. There is no one right answer, especially if you cannot have a collaborative culture where the team works together all the time and the team limits its WIP all the time. So that's why combination approaches really work well. Now, if you have component teams, even if your component teams collaborate really well, you have a lot of trouble with how to check in, how often to check in, how do you create a total feature set that's releasable. And I have suggestions about policies here. I strongly recommend, if you have component teams, everybody checks in at least once a day. Everybody builds the system at least once a day. And as soon as anything breaks the build, you fix that first. You never actually go on to the next item, the next story, the next whatever, until you have a clean build across the entire product. Now, if you've read any of my swarming posts, you might notice this as swarming at the team level. Totally fine. It's a form of agility, even if it's not purely agile, whatever the heck that means. So agile approaches come in 2 major flavors. The first is iteration-based, as in Scrum, right? The time boxes are all the same length. So this is where supposedly relative estimation helps you figure out how you can do everything for these several items, these stories, these features in one time box. Now, a Kanban system does not need time boxes because the team limits its WIP by limiting the number of features they work on. The team limits its WIP in iterations by saying, we will, in general, we can do 2 or 3 or 4 items inside an iteration. We will do just that, or which is cycle time, not relative estimation. If you really want me to talk about relative estimation and say nasty things about it, we can do that in the comments afterwards. But the whole idea here, you can use cycle time in a time box, in an iteration-based approach. You can use cycle time and figure out how to deliver a relatively similar size work on a regular cadence. So it does not matter what you choose. I happen to work in more of a Kanban system rather than iterations. For years, I worked in 1 week iterations in my own business, and now I work just in time. And I find that for me, this is working better. I right size all of my work. If you've been reading my stuff for a while, you're not surprised by any of this. Okay, so let's do a little poll for agility. And this is Gabrielle, you are in charge now.
Yeah, so go ahead and click on the poll section. You should be able to see the poll for your agility showing up. Feel free to vote. And we'll wait a few seconds just to see what everyone says. All right, we do have some votes coming in so far. Keep on voting. I see there's a lot of competition between the second and the third option. Okay, Johanna, so far, number one is leading the way with about 46%. Many people are still trying to limit the WIP, but they do have urgent items that interrupt us. They often have to work more than what they expect. Yeah, and then the second option is the second most popular. At 21%, my team tries to limit its WIP, but sometimes we need to add items such as production support to an iteration. And then trailing on, we do have option number 3 at 15%, limit WIP. You're joking. Many of our items roll over to the next iteration because we can't finish or we have too many interruptions. And finally, at 10%, we have trouble finishing our work, so we create cruft that comes back to bite us. And the last one at 6%, my team always limits its WIP in some way. We finish what we start before taking new work.
Yeah, that's we try to limit WIP, and my team tries to limit WIP. Those two are something I see all the time. And I think that's because so many of us are, I'm trying not to say bad things about iterations, but iterations always assume you can plan for and let's call it a 2-week iteration. We always assume in an iteration we can totally plan what we are going to do. But it's the same problem as planning for the project portfolio for a year, except in the team, it's even more, it's more pronounced because we are trying to work on small items. We're trying to limit our WIP, so we only work on those small items. And that's because things happen. Now, you can leave room in your iteration for urgent items and production support, and I used to recommend that. But now, this is why I'm much more, this is why I use Kanban and more recommended for my clients. You can use Kanban inside of an iteration, right? You don't have to use one or the other. You can use Kanban so you can visualize when things come in and what kinds of things they are. So instead of having a whole bunch of work that you will or will not start for the next iteration, you can say, we will limit our WIP in some way, and often by the total number of items on the board. And then if you right size those items, which cycle time is a virtuous metric and wants you to do, if you use cycle time, you are much more likely to be able to both limit your WIP and account for these interruptions. So it's not it's not that Kanban is perfect, but Kanban shows you things that a 3-column Scrum board does not show you, right? So it's all about visualizing the work and visualizing for your particular team. Let's not talk about organizations that want to demand everybody use the same board. We can also address that in the conversation after this. So let me talk about how ways you can increase agility regardless of your approach, because all the life cycles are sort of useful in some ways. I have a lot of trouble with the serial life cycles, but yeah, we can use them. So every time I work with a team, I suggest that they focus on the flow of the work, not what individual people do. This is the huge culture change. This is a picture of flow efficiency thinking, where the work assignment arrives as a team, the team collaborates to finish their work. This is why component teams are so anti-agility, right? Because they're focused on the architecture, right? The user interface people, the front end people, the API people, the app layer, the middleware, the platform, all of those various layers, and they are not working as a team to finish their work. They all have their parts. So instead, and the problem is this focusing on the flow of work totally changes how managers need to pay people and recognize people for what they do. As an example, if you have senior technical people on your team, do they get paid for coaching other people, to raising the ability of every single person on the team to their level? No, probably not. They probably get paid for their work. That's why focusing on the flow of work, focusing on flow efficiency, and not measuring it, I don't care about measuring it, but focusing on flow efficiency thinking is and actions are such a culture challenge to agility. That's a huge piece of this. So that's why flow efficiency is necessary and often missing in agile transformations. Another team tip, I should say, is to reduce or time box all that upfront work. So if you have to do a whole bunch of planning on the backlog or for the roadmap or for architecture, time box it, right? Don't do a whole lot of big design up front. That's when you know the least about the product and the customers and what the customers want. So for years and years, I time boxed requirements to 2 weeks, and everybody yelled and screamed. And I said, if I time box this to 1 week, you would really yell and scream. But if I time box this to 2 weeks, you have enough time to think about this and reflect on it as you iterate through the requirements. And to be honest, you know the first 5 things we need to do with this product right away. I could ask you for those 5 things now, and you would be able to tell me, and then you could go back to thinking more about the requirements, more about the architecture, while we iterate and deliver incrementally. So that's that third piece, to deliver as often as possible, at least internally. Now, internal delivery is not ideal, but as long as other people outside the team are looking at what your team delivers, you are much more likely to actually see things that are working and see things that are not working. That's ideal for a retrospective, right? And whether the team does the retrospective itself or incorporates external feedback just from inside the organization, all of that really helps the team figure out what's the next thing to do? And I don't know how many of you have a lot of team change, but most of my clients have a lot of multitasking inside their organization. And that means that even if they start this project with a cross-functional team, somebody gets pulled off to work on that project. Somebody gets pulled off to work on that other project. It's not ideal. In fact, it's just not ideal. It's anti-agility because teams cannot work in flow efficiency thinking then. So if you start the project, start and maintain that cross-functional team that works on this one project for the entire project. It's really, I find that that's much more likely to be successful. All right, now let's talk about flow metrics. I find that when we think about cycle time is how long it takes to get things done. This is why cycle time is far superior to relative estimation. When I am an old programmer, right? I started programming professionally back in the 70s. So we talked a lot then about ideal time and wall time. And ideal time was what we all estimated the work would take. And we were actually pretty close with our ideal time. But the wall time always was longer. Always. That's because we got interrupted. That's because we had to ask people a question and that person was over there, not on our project. So wall time is what cycle time is. What's really nice about cycle time is if you do a value stream map, you can also see where the work gets stuck and where you have internal feedback loops that you don't want, right? Those unplanned feedback loops. What's nice about aging is that you get to see how long the work gets stuck for. And if you actually monitor your aging, you can see, oh, we've had this outstanding issue that's been on our backlog for the last 4 iterations, now 5 iterations, now 6 iterations, right? At some point, you might need to say, as I do with my office, I'm not going to clean my office. We're not going to touch that thing. And all of you have aging in the form of all kinds of heaviness that you have to bring along with you. If you are using a tool for your bugs, for your defects, or you're using any kind of ticketing system, then you are using a tool that increases your aging because you just put it into the tool. I am of the opinion that once a quarter you throw out everything in those tools, and anything that's useful, people have to put back into the tool. That's an interesting approach that I suspect more of your managers would not want. But it's interesting because it would start to reduce your cycle time. If things are important, you would get to them. And if things are not important, you don't even need to think about them. And that goes for all the stuff in your roadmaps. The good stuff comes back. The interesting work comes back. The customer necessary work comes back. You don't have to hold on to it all the time. It's just not worth it. Now, WIP is work in progress, and the amount of it affects your cycle time and your throughput, which is the throughput is how often does a team release something. So if you have a WIP of, say, 3 for your 7 or 8 person team, that might be the right number. And if your throughput is only 1 thing a week, then the WIP is all the aging is going to increase, and the cycle time is going to, I should never do public arithmetic. I already forgot what I said. Sorry. The longer the cycle time, the more WIP and the lower the throughput. So we'll just forget any of the numbers I put in there, and you can all laugh at me later. And then at some point, I will actually plug in numbers and show you how that works. But the idea is the more WIP you have, the longer it takes for things to get out of your team. And if you even just replace the WIP every week, you never make progress. At some point, you need less coming in than you have going out. Okay, so agile is really not the point, right? Agility is the point, because agility is the way you can fulfill your customers' needs. Instead of trying to be agile, whatever that means, focus on your team's agility. Focus on a life cycle that fits your project, your product, and the organizational risk. Ask yourself, especially if you're a leader in some way, how can you bring more joy and ease to the work? And when you fulfill your customers' needs, the revenue will follow, assuming you have customers for this product. And the way to find that out is to release something early. So really think about agility, not agile. Agility, not Scrum or Kanban. Agility, not any given practice, right? Agility is what matters. And the tips and the flow metrics, those are the best guidance I can give you for more agility. I hope that we stay in touch. I've been writing a lot. I hope that you link with me on LinkedIn. I no longer use Twitter. I use Mastodon. And let me just say this. As Planisware, I have a really terrific relationship with Planisware, and they sponsored this workshop. So thank you. I don't use their products. They don't use me, except we really like what each other has to say on LinkedIn. So there we are. Okay. Gabriel, take it away. It's yours.
Yes, thank you, Johanna, for your presentation. We're really excited now to hear from our audience, so please feel free to submit your questions using the questions tab located at the bottom of your screen. But while we do wait for some of your questions to come in, Johanna, we did receive some questions prior to the event. So just to kind of get us started, here is question number one. Why do businesses often overlook the identification and mitigation of risks, especially in projects involving end customers?
I think that it's not so much that they don't consider the risks as much as we are not learning from what we did before. So one of the things, as a consultant, I can do this easily. You can do this also. Here's a little internal consulting tip. You can say, in your last project, what happened that you would like to have known at the beginning and you would like to have planned for then? And notice I did not say the risk word. I didn't say learn what risks you had and manage those risks. I said, what would you like to have known? And I find that that's a really helpful frame for learning from risks that have already occurred in previous projects.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Johanna. Second question here. Why do companies often assign project management to resources on the basis of availability and not the experience?
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the R word, the resource word. The more you think about people as resources, the more you think about resource efficiency. How efficient is each of these people in their work? Instead, I'm going to go back to the presentation and say, if you think about flow efficiency, right, and think about a team of people who can deliver this work, you are much more likely to succeed. So think about the team and not so much the individuals. And that goes back to how does your organization manage the project portfolio? Do they try and pick people with the right skills, or do they pick teams who have a shot of working together? The more you assign work to a team and help the team figure out how to work together, the more likely you are to have a team of people deliver. So that's one of the reasons I focus on flow efficiency so much. It's not so much the individual capability of the team, but when we work together, we are much more likely to succeed than when we work alone.
Great. Thank you, Johanna. We do have another question here. What is the essential difference between waterfall and agile? You can perfectly do a waterfall project to get a MVP.
You can, and you can do that, especially if you do that in a short amount of time. If nothing is going to change, a waterfall is fine. It's just when and notice that question had an MVP, right? A minimum viable product. So the more you think about the minimum viable product, if you can stop right there, fine. Use a waterfall. There's nothing wrong with it. The only thing that's wrong with a waterfall is when you have unplanned feedback loops, especially late in the project. The more unplanned feedback loops you have, the harder everything gets. And that's where the flow metrics come into play. Because if you realize you got to the end of this project and you have now an unplanned feedback loop, you cannot say we finished anything. You have to go back to the beginning. Now you have a longer cycle time, more WIP, and your throughput is a lot lower. So I'm not saying a serial life cycle or a waterfall is bad. It's only bad for the less deterministic. The more discovery you need, the less a waterfall can work. So, yeah.
Great. Let's answer a question here from Brian Belville. He says, it's hard not to move a bit towards component approach when you have distributed teams in different time zones. Feedback form, those teams may mean a 24-hour wait. Have you any suggestions? Thanks.
Yes, I'm going to suggest that you take a look at From Chaos to Successful Distributed Agile Teams. You don't have an Agile team if people are in very many different time zones. You don't have a team. You have individuals trying to do the best job they have. My first suggestion is create a value stream map, right? Show everybody on the team, show the managers where the work is and how long it takes to move the work from one piece or one person to another person. Because you don't have a team, right? If I go back to, I think there's a way to go back to, oh, yes. Let me find my General Agile picture so I can show you what I mean. This collaborative team. I'm looking and I can't find it because, of course, I can't find it. Maybe that's it. Yes. Okay. So notice this my general agile picture is about a collaborative cross-functional team. If you have people that far separated by time zone, they are not a collaborative cross-functional team. They might be a cooperative cross-functional team, but their ability to use any agile approach is minimal. So with that many time zones different, it's really, really hard to use an agile approach. That's where, let me see if I can get back to my tips. Gabriel, I'm having a good time with all of the being able to see the slides and not creating vertigo in anybody else. How much can you focus on flow efficiency for your team? How much can you reduce or time box any upfront work? How often can you deliver? You probably need to right size items to be very, very small. And the tendency in distributed teams is to make them much larger because of the questions, the time you might need for questions to go back and forth.
Yeah, thank you, Johanna. Just the last quick question before we end this session. Again, can you repeat what's your new book and where to find it?
Yes. So I'm going to go here. Whoops. The Project Lifecycles book is everywhere. There's a handy dandy short URL. It's in paper and in hardcover, in ebook. I believe it's everywhere right now. Sometimes publishing takes a little longer than I would expect, so it might be propagating, especially if you're not in the US. Oh, well. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you, Johanna. I really appreciate you participating in this workshop. And again, everyone's questions has been really engaging and allowed for us to have a great discussion. Johanna, thank you again for your presentation. So if anyone wants to dive in a little bit deeper on today's topic, we do have the book available. Everyone, again, will receive the first chapter for free, as well as this recording. We kindly also invite for you to check her book out through the link that she has provided there. And then finally, we do encourage you to join our monthly newsletter called Streamline. It's our monthly newsletter where we kind of just share the top 10 articles in project management that you will find also in the link in the comments below. Keep an eye out for upcoming PlanningsWare events, and we sincerely hope that you enjoyed this event, and we look forward to having you in our next one. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.